Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on the smarter way to cloud, where we will learn how to operate and consume private cloud more smartly. My name is Baisakhi, and I'm a part of the APAC marketing team here at Broadcom and your moderator for today. We are excited for taking our time. We are excited to have you on this webinar today, and thank you for joining and taking your time. In the next 60 minutes, you will be on an exciting journey to uncover the world of private cloud. I would now like to introduce our speakers for today. So we'll have Will Mansfield, Cloud Infrastructure Architecture Leader, Broadcom, supported by Mark Foley, Solution Architecture Leader, Broadcom, who will take you to an exciting journey of private cloud. And I know you will love to ask questions, so we also have a panel. We have a question and answer panel set up. So we will have our experts, Murugan Enam, Solution Engineering Leader, India, Broadcom, supported by Chris Combe, Solution Architect, Broadcom, Vincent Hahn, Solution Architect, Broadcom. So do ask your questions. Few pointers while we go to the presentation is do not forget to ask your question and answers. Do use the question and answers to ask your questions. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and we will share the recording after the session for the people who attended. Also, there is a small survey. We would love to hear your feedback from the session. And of course, you get a chance to win a digital badge, a smart digital badge. So without much delay, over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Baisakhi. I'm just going to share my slide there. It's all right.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So welcome everyone to the session. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Mark Foley. I'm joined here by my colleague Will, who's actually sitting next to me today. We're going to spend probably about 45 to 50 minutes going through VCF vision and direction. We're going to talk a little bit about VCF 5.2 and the upcoming VCF 9 release and give you a little bit of roadmap information about that. And we're also going to talk about a smarter way to build, operate, and consume a private cloud. During our session, we'll probably stop a couple of times and take some Q&A from the panel. So please do use that Q&A tab as we go through. The panel may answer some of your questions online, or we may address them during the session as we go. So I'm going to start by talking about VCF vision and direction. Before I do, I just need to share with you that we are going to be covering some roadmap items in this session. And I want to make very clear that any future functionality that we talk about is currently planned and not yet committed by Broadcom. So you should use this presentation for informational purposes only. So with that out of the way, I want to introduce this part of the session by talking about the mission of VMware. And, our mission is to deliver the best private cloud platform to accelerate innovation. And when I talk to customers about this, most of them are very much in agreement that cloud and a cloud operating model is a great way to accelerate innovation. However, some of you might question the benefit of the private cloud part of that. And certainly since I've been at VMware since 2017, people have been consistently telling me that private cloud will not matter because very soon all workloads will be running on public cloud, when the reality could be nothing further from the truth. Earlier this year, Barclays Bank did a survey of a large number of CIOs, and they found that 83% of enterprises were planning to move workloads from public cloud back to private cloud. And, when you think about it, it makes sense. There's been a lot of hype around public cloud for a number of years, and a lot of enterprises moved a lot of workloads from private to public. And the reality is many of those workloads were probably not best suited to running in a public cloud environment. So, we believe that the future of the enterprise is actually going to be private cloud. We think that going forward, your most critical, most important applications are going to continue running on a private cloud environment. And we believe this because, when we talk to you about public versus private, you tell us some of the challenges you're seeing with public cloud. Things like cost and the unpredictability of cost in the public cloud. The fact is that your bills change so dramatically from year to year or from month to month. That's a major headache for many of you. The complexity of public cloud, it was initially going to be something that was supposed to be much, much simpler to run and operate. And in fact, it turns out it's actually very, very complex to effectively run a public cloud environment. And finally, compliance. For many of you, you have legal and regulatory requirements. That means you're simply not able to deploy some of your applications into that public cloud environment. And then the other thing we consistently see time and time again, when we look at the total cost of ownership of a private cloud environment versus a public cloud environment, almost every time a well-run private cloud is a much more cost-effective alternative than running those same workloads in a public cloud environment. So we're going to spend a lot of time in this session talking about private cloud, but before we do that, I want to talk about one of the things that private cloud is not. And a private cloud is not a traditional data center. By traditional data center, I mean those siloed, old-fashioned data centers where we had silos of people, looking after storage or networking or compute. Would go and acquire best-of-breed technology, and we ended up with what was usually a fairly poorly integrated data center environment. And what that meant was those environments were actually very expensive to build, very expensive to operate, and really not very agile. So the people wanting to deploy applications into those environments faced lengthy delays in terms of deploying new workloads and deploying new applications. This is not a private cloud, and this is not something that enterprises are looking to repatriate workloads to. And it's also not something that's going to be that competitive with a public cloud environment. So, our mission at VMware is to help you move from this style of traditional data center to go to a true private cloud environment to give you a really valid alternative to public cloud. And in the same way that silos aren't that great in your data center environment, it actually turned out the silos were not very good for our business either. And one of the first things that Broadcom did when they acquired VMware is they took all the various business units that built the components that went into VMware Cloud Foundation, and we put together a unified VCF division. So a single business unit focused on a single outcome. And I believe you're already starting to see the outcome of this in some of the recent releases of VCF. So for instance, in 5.2, we saw a much more unified experience and a much better integrated product. And you're going to see that trend continued with some of the capabilities and features we're releasing in VCF 9 and beyond. At the same time, that renewed focus and the consistent focus on private cloud meant that our customer success organization has been able to put a lot more resource into making you successful with private cloud. Because at the end of the day, we're going to spend most of our time in this session talking about technology side of things, but private cloud is also a very significant people and process challenge as well. So we need to help you upskill your people and revise your processes so you're going to be effective and successful in adopting private cloud. So let's start to talk about VMware Cloud Foundation, the roadmap, and some of the things we think about when we're evolving VCF towards VCF 9. So when we're designing VCF, we think about two different classes of persona that we want to service really well. The first class of persona is probably many of the people on this call, and they're the people that build, operate, and deploy a private cloud environment. We want to make your life a lot simpler and a lot more predictable. We want to reduce the number of tools and consoles that you have to deal with and to successfully manage and operate that private cloud. We want to simplify the process of monitoring those environments. We want to simplify the process of identifying and fixing any problems in that environment. And we also want to give you as much automation as possible to make your job as easy as possible. So you would have seen that focus in the recent release of VCF 5.2, and Will's going to cover a lot of that capability, but there's more of that on the way. The other persona that we target are the consumers of private cloud. So these are our application teams, our DevOps, our platform engineers. The sort of things they want to see are a wide array of services. So it's no longer sufficient to just offer a traditional VM service. Our consumers need VMs, they need containers, they need Kubernetes, They need advanced AI services. They need some of the add-ons we can provide around load balancing and security. So all of these things need to be available to our consumers. These things need to be easy to consume, and at the same time also we need the appropriate governance around those services so that we don't see a lot of architectural variations, so people going off and creating applications that don't comply to our standards, or people deploying resources that are not good use of our company resources. So that governance and compliance side of things is important as well. So that's one aspect of the evolution of VCF. The other aspect of the evolution of VCF is the continual improvement of those underlying compute, storage, and networking components. I'm not going to go through these things in any great detail, but you'll see here, the recent 5.2 release, a number of improvements in terms of your ability to consolidate your environment, in terms of scalability and performance of those environments. And that trend is only going to continue as we continue to develop VCF version 9. So what is actually coming in 9? And, Will's going to cover some of the stuff in more detail. I'm just going to call out a few of the things in this slide in a bit more detail. So in Cloud Foundation 9, we really have two types of innovation. One of these platform-wide integration features that kind of touch all aspects of the platform. And another type of innovation is in that compute, storage, and networking improvements that we talked about earlier. So in the platform-wide side of things, the first thing is a continuation of what you saw in 5.2. So this continual building out of this fleet-level operations and management. So in 5.2, we introduced the concept of a VCF console. So you are less and less going to have to go into individual vCenters and SDDC managers, and you are more and more going to be able to manage your environment from this VCF console. So one location to manage all of your environments. At the same time as this, we're continuing to enhance our VCF import capabilities. So again, Will's going to cover import in more detail, but in 9, we're going to allow you to import a lot of more different classes of environments. And the beauty of importing an existing environment means that once you import, you're going to be able to apply that fleet level operations console to those imported environments. So again, your brand new deployed environments or your existing environments, single console to manage all of that. The last of those platform-wide features is VCF multi-tenancy. So multi-tenancy is something we've had available to our service provider customers for a long time now, and we're really excited to bring it into the enterprise environment. And we think for many of you, it's going to be a really, really valuable feature, and it really introduces a public cloud-like construct that we think is going to be enormously valuable to you going forward. So what about those other sort of component level capabilities? Well, I'm not going to go through all of these. Some of these are going to be covered by Will in detail later on, but some of the things to call out: improvements in the vSphere Kubernetes storage, Kubernetes service, so better integration with the underlying networking, support things like Windows containers in vSphere Kubernetes. In the networking side of things, much higher performance switching and networking performance. We're going to make it much simpler to migrate from traditional VLAN-based networking to software-defined networking. In the storage side of things, we're going to build on the vSAN data protection that we released in 5.2. But there's a couple of things in this list that really are very easy to let sneak under the radar, but I think you really need to be aware of, because they're going to translate to very large cost savings for most organizations that adopt VCF 9. The first of these is the integrated vSAN global deduplication. So our estimate is that this is going to lead to up to a 40% improvement in storage efficiency. Now, we see vSAN as a very, very competitive option for storage, particularly compared to the traditional storage vendors. With the introduction of dedupe, it's just going to be even more cost effective. So, if vSAN is not something you've looked at for a while, I think you need to have a look at it again, because it's going to deliver really significant cost savings to those customers that adopt it. The other thing that's going to be really interesting for our vSphere 9 customers is memory tiering with NVMe. And, we don't have enough time in this session to go into detail on this. There's a great presentation that's available online that was done at the recent Explore conference. But basically, memory tiering allows you to replace really expensive physical memory with cheap NVMe devices. Our testing and some of the consultation we've done with customers indicates that you're going to be able to achieve up to a 40% improvement in consolidation using our memory tiering. So let's make that clear what I mean by 40%. That's a 40% potential 40% reduction in your hardware bill, right? So this is big dollars to anyone. And one of the nice things about memory tiering is that this feature is actually available in pre-release now. So if you're on a later version of vSphere, you can start testing this at the moment. And we find a lot of our colleagues in the VMware community who run home labs are getting a lot of benefit out of adopting memory tiering. So if you're not already looking at it, it's something you really need to look at right now. So that's some of the technical capabilities that are coming in BCF 9. As I said earlier, moving to a private cloud is not just about technology, it's also about the people and processes, and we're putting a lot of effort into helping you with that. One of the things we want to make you aware of is the private cloud maturity model that we recently released at Explore in Las Vegas. This is effectively a way of you benchmarking where you're at in the adoption of private cloud and also identifying where you should be for the goals of your organization. So it's a great first step in terms of starting that journey towards private cloud. If you are a VMware customer and you're adopting VCF, then there's a very good chance you're eligible for a free Jumpstart workshop. So this basically takes the output of the private cloud maturity model and essentially produces a tailored adoption plan for you with a set of actionable recommendations. And we've had customers here in Australia have great success with this workshop and sort of answering the whole where do I start question. Alongside of this, our education team, they've uplifted our certifications. So our certifications are all now relevant to VCF. And also, at the same time, if you are a VCF customer, you're also eligible for free learning and training, so unlimited access to our digital training library. So again, please make use of that because that's a great resource for getting up to speed with all this great technology. So that's the end of a section on the VCF vision and direction. But one of the things I'd like to leave you with is, as I say, there's some great capabilities coming in VCF 9, but the fastest way to get to VCF 9 is adopt VCF 5.2 today. We're going to go through in detail some of those capabilities in 5.2, but there's a lot of benefit to your organization in 5.2. And as I say, if you're on 5.2, the step to 9 is going to be much more straightforward and easy. So with that, I think we've had some questions come through on the Q&A, and I think that's a great time to kind of pause, get back to the moderator, and let's take some of these questions.
I think I'll post the first question to Murugan. Two questions, Murugan, here. Is there a comparison sheet for TCO comparison between private cloud and public cloud? Also, how does the cloud maturity model helps adopt the private cloud?
Great. Welcome, everyone. I think I'll take the first question. There was a question by Pooja Chowdhury. Is there a TCO comparison sheet between private cloud and public cloud? Yes, we can build that cost model for you because it differs organization to organization, because the cost of private cloud for one organization might differ than the other. So it is something that we build when we work with you as a team. And yes, there is clearly differentiator between what a private cloud has to offer versus a public cloud. If you ask me what is a generic number that I've seen, it ranges anywhere between 35 to 40%. The private cloud is cheaper than public cloud. But yes, it differs from organization to organization. Okay. The second question, Vaisakhi, you want to repeat the second question?
Second question, how does the cloud maturity model helps to adopt the private cloud?
Oh, okay. This is one of the unique programs that VMware by Broadcom started a few months ago. The idea is, what we understand is our customers across the industry verticals are at various stages of their cloud journey, right? The idea was to understand where they are in their journey, sit with them, help with them understand what VCF brings to the table, help them to realize the value of VCF over a period of time, build an actual capability maturity model for them so that they know where they want to go. As Marx mentioned in the previous slide, you can be one of those candidates who are eligible for that free assessment. The idea is just to help you through your private cloud journey.
Thank you, Muru. The second question, I'll pose it to Chris. In the previous load per VM cost is $2,307, quite high. Okay. Sorry. Is it for 1 year, and what all the things it includes? That's the first question for you, Chris.
Sure. Okay. So quickly on that one, obviously costs per VM can vary per organization for many of the reasons that Murugan just mentioned. That particular example on that early slide is based on a white paper that was done by IDC. So what we'll do is we'll post that into the resources section for you so you can see the baseline and assumptions and how that was calculated, and then adjust that for your own use case.
Okay, the second question to you, Chris, is memory tiering sounds interesting, but will it have a significant impact on performance?
That's a great question, and I think so. For those who are not familiar, I think Mark touched on it, but NVMe memory tiering is the concept of using less expensive NVMe disks as a secondary memory in an ESXi host rather than buying more of more expensive RAM. I think overall the answer is, use the right technology for the right workloads. But the question tends to come usually from a perspective of the fact that NVMe and RAM have different performance characteristics. And by that, particularly when we look at latency differences, NVMe is fast with response times measured in microseconds, but RAM is exceptionally fast, right? Faster still than NVMe. So people rightly say, hey, NVMe is slower than RAM, and that's true. But what we sometimes miss is the big picture of, hey, well, memory response times might be the millionths of seconds, and that's actually fine for this application. There's going to be other stuff that affects the application performance and the end user experience more than the extra microseconds that memory tiering might introduce. But then when you look at the economic impact of memory tiering, it's potentially a huge saving for organizations. The cost of a terabyte of NVMe is significantly less than a terabyte of RAM, and so you multiply that across your entire server fleet, and it's quite possible that you might save, I think, up to 40% based on the research that we saw. So as always, there's applications where it's not suitable, real-time applications where those microseconds do count. But for the vast majority of workloads, it's a trade-off that many people are willing to make in order to reduce their total cost of ownership, get higher density with a negligible kind of performance impact. I think if you're interested in it, do look it up. It's available now in technical preview and is planned to go mainstream in VCF 9. Thanks.
Okay, last question to Vincent. What impact do you think global dedupe is going to have on available storage capacity?
Hey, hi. So with global vCENT dedupe, you're going to have data dedupe across clusters. So you're going to have more storage to use from the storage perspective. And in terms of cost, right, you are able to reduce your storage cost by 46% per terabyte as compared to traditional solutions.
Okay. Okay, I think we'll take up the rest of the questions after the session. Over to you, Will.
Excellent. Thank you. So as Mark said, I'm going to jump into now some of the innovations that we brought within VCF 5.2, and the way in which I'm going to break this section down is really describe how VMware Cloud Foundation VCF can help with building your private cloud, obviously operating your private cloud, and finally then consuming the cloud that you build in terms of deploying VMs, containers to serve your business. And really, there's different stages that you might be in here. And with each of these stages, we've had a number of feedback from our customers around where we can help them to build their cloud to operate and to consume. And from the build perspective, there's a number of challenges that we do often hear. The first being one around, we obviously, many of you, probably all of you, have vSphere in your environment today. You've deployed that based off the architecture that made best sense for your business and what you need to support. The question then is, well, how do I move towards VCF to really get the benefits of building up a cloud operating model and do that through VMware Cloud Foundation? The second common question is, software-defined networking is really a key part of building up a private cloud. So how do we take our workloads that are running on VLAN-backed networks through a distributed port group onto a software-defined networking construct and leverage the benefits that brings? So that'll be what we kick this section off with. We'll focus on that, and then we'll move through the journey. So as Mark said, a huge really initial release here of VCF import, and it's something that many of our customers have asked for quite some time. What this is in the initial version is we can take your currently deployed vSphere and vSAN clusters and import that into VCF. What this means is prior you would need to deploy new hardware, greenfields environment, and then deploy VCF onto that new hardware and migrate onto VCF. And that was the approach that you needed to take. Now there's really potentially not the need for that new hardware. You can ingest what you currently have, get started with VCF, move into that cloud operating model, and realize the benefits that VCF brings. There's a whole load of checks that's built into this process to do the VCF import so that you know that you're going to have the outcome that you desire at the end of it and that you meet the requirements. Also, this is just the beginning with the initial release. We plan to support NSX topologies as well as vDefend and RVs to really start to encapsulate more of the topologies that we see our customers that they've deployed over the years, and allowing them to brownfield migrate into VCF. So really, really cool feature that we've brought out. Now, there's two use cases here with the VCF import capability. The first being convert, and convert is really what you would do to kick this process off. This is what you do when you're not running VCF. And what we do is we effectively take your vSphere and vSAN environments and build up what you're seeing there on the slide, which is a VCF management domain. And we call this a workload domain. And a workload domain is really a unit of capacity that brings together compute, storage, networking, its own vCenter, and lifecycle management from a patching perspective and so forth is all done within that workload domain. So that's what the convert does. It gets you started in VCF. The second use case is the import function, which is obviously what you run once you have VCF running within your environment. So what does it look like in terms of how we actually do this? Well, as I said, the first step here in your environment, if you're running vSphere and vSAN, is to deploy what we call the SDDC manager, really a key part of the brains of VCF. You deploy the SDDC manager within your vSphere cluster, you point it to vCenter, and then you run a script which converts that cluster into a VCF management workload domain. And there you have your workload domain that's running your food and water services for your private cloud environment. It's running your NSX services, obviously vSAN, vSphere, vCenter, and you're ready to get started with building out your VCF environment. So once you've done that, or if you already have VCF running today, you can then use the import function to ingest vSphere and vSAN clusters that you have running within your data center. Similar process whereby we're using a Python script. Once again, we're pointing this to your vSphere clusters. Key difference here is we bring these clusters in as additional virtual infrastructure, VI on the slide, workload domains. Once again, these are lifecycle managed individually outside from other workload domains. And that can work really nicely when you have your environment clustered into different functions. Maybe it's dev, prod, test, from a software development perspective. Potentially it's different business units, maybe it's even different tenants within your organization. But this is the initial release, and we're going to continue to extend those topologies where we can ingest your environment into VCF. So something that many of our customers have asked for, and a really, really cool feature that's come out with VCF 5.2. Switching gears into storage now. So Mark spoke about vSAN. vSAN, believe it or not, has been out for over a decade now. vSAN was originally released with an architecture when really NVMe wasn't that mainstream. NVMe devices are very much mainstream now. They deliver significant performance. And with that, a little while ago, we introduced the vSAN Express Storage Architecture, ESA for short. And what that does is that really delivers the true performance that NVMe devices bring, which are quite significant if you've looked at the specs. And that's what we do with the vSAN ESA architecture now. With the vSAN ESA architecture, we can now stretch that across availability zones within VCF. So what that means is you can be running 2 data centers, each in their own availability zone, have synchronous replication, and autonomous failover in the event of, say, a site outage. So your VMs reboot and stand up in the surviving site. So that resilience is now within the VCF platform. The second piece is from a disaggregation perspective, we can disaggregate storage with vSAN Max, now known as vSAN storage clusters, whereby we can present storage-only nodes running vSAN, present that vSAN storage to compute clusters, your workload domains in VCF. So really giving you that flexibility of obviously scaling storage independent of compute, and increasing the flexibility in terms of the storage that VCF consumes to run your workloads today. So 2 really cool enhancements to the VCF platform. Now, from a networking perspective, I mentioned the importance of software-defined networking for building a true private cloud, true cloud experience model. So what we can do is with VMware tools that many of you will be running in your virtual machines today, we can obviously see the subnet in which those virtual machines are running on. Typically they're obviously VLAN-backed distributed port groups that these VMs are attached to. So in the middle of the slide there, what you're seeing is we can create an NSX virtual network that matches that VLAN-backed network. We deploy a bridge, if you will. And what happens is we move VMs into this NSX virtual network. They continue to route out through the physical router where the gateway is hosted. You continue to move VMs. Then when you're ready, you can cut over to an NSX virtual router that houses the gateway. And at that point, on the far right-hand side there, you're effectively now move those VMs that were on a VLAN-backed distributed port group into an NSX virtual network. And you get many benefits. One that I can think of right now is being you can have layer 2 adjacent VMs spanning across racks within a data center, right? Which is typically not the case. So there's a lot of benefits, and that obviously drives compute utilization up, and of course the flexibility of where you put workloads within your private cloud. So a really cool capability that we brought to the platform. VPCs, which if you are familiar with, Google Cloud, AWS, VNets, if you're an Azure shop, VPCs is something that exists within NSX today. However, this is bringing it natively towards into VCF automation. And what we're doing here is giving you that, obviously that cloud-like familiarity on premises, but also the ability for VPC admins to have their own logically isolated space where they can stand up networks as required to support the applications that they're deploying for their business without the worry of potentially causing concern for other tenants that you might be running across different businesses within your organization and so forth. So it's bringing that level of isolation and agility native into the VCF platform. And this is a planned innovation for us in future releases of VCF. So I've spoken about a number of things in terms of what VCF can bring in terms of building up your private cloud and what we brought into the platform. Let's look at the operational perspective, which there's many different day-to-day things that you need to do in your environment to run a private cloud. Some of the key challenges that we see, as Mark mentioned, silos, technology silos that obviously require their own specialized skill sets, but also integrations, bespoke integrations between the stacks, as well as their own dashboards for control and management plans and so forth. The ability to do service provider grade multi-tenancy, what you'd expect with a service provider or in the public cloud. So let's take a look at what we're doing with VCF to address those challenges. And lifecycle management operating cloud is quite complex. So we've brought a lot of capability into this area to simplify, and they're really in these four streams that you're seeing on the slide at the moment. We'll talk to the lifecycle management pieces. We'll talk to unifying dashboards in terms of helping with diagnostics and remediation, centralizing license management and certificates management, and then finally getting into that multi-tenancy piece. So let's get into it. With VCF, there's a number of different tasks that we automate that you would be doing day to day now within your private cloud, within your VMware fleet. Now, there's 4 categories there, and from the deployment perspective, I've spoken about the ability to convert and import to help you get into VCF quickly and start to automate these tasks that you're seeing there now. Scaling though, what about the ability to, when we need to add additional compute or memory or storage capacity, how do we quickly bring in a bare metal server, image that with the correct version of vSphere, NSX, vSAN, and add that to our workload domain so that we can start consuming that capacity? Conversely, what about the ability to delete that and add it into the capacity pool so that we can add that into another workload domain as demands across our environment fluctuate? From a patching and upgrading perspective, I think we can all appreciate how challenging that can be across your disparate environment. So the ability to have the interop already checked for you as part of a VCF bill of materials, and then schedule those upgrades across your fleet. And finally, we talk about certificate management and how challenging and tedious that can be across your VMware fleet, as well as managing passwords across all your VMware appliances. And that's something that I do want to get into a little bit more detail now. So from a perspective of password management, we have the ability in the UI within VCF to individually update passwords for your appliances that you run within VCF, ESXi, of course, vCenter, NSX Manager, and so forth. And you also have the ability to rotate that automatically. So you can schedule 30, 60, 90 days to rotate the passwords across these appliances with complex passwords and do that automatically. So obviously simplifying the process of password rotation, but also significantly increasing your security posture by being able to do this. Mark spoke about, and I also spoke about console consolidation. So we've got a lot of different consoles in the VMware fleet of tooling, bringing these together into 2 primary consoles, VCF Operations and VCF Automation. And these 2 consoles will really be the place where many different roles within your organization will go to do the day-to-day. So the build of VCF, the operational management, remediation, troubleshooting, lifecycle management, when I talk about patching, the password rotation, certificates, all of that will be done from 2 consoles. And this is something that we are building and is planned innovation to come in a future release of VCF. Now, getting into a bit more detail around some of these dashboards, when you think about license management, which it can be quite complex when you're running different licenses across a very big footprint. How do we see the licenses that we currently have applied and the historical trend of our license usage? Not only that, but the ability to apply a single VCF license to enable all those VCF entitlements that we have across our estate, as well as the ability to see the certificates that we're running across our VMware estate, the issuer, whether the certificate's, of course, valid and when it's due to expire, and getting ahead of replacing those certificates before we get to the point of authentication failures and the like due to expired certificates. Now, on the topic of diagnosis and getting to the root cause of issues and then taking remediation steps, we've had a number of tools that have done this over the years. Skyline Advisor, which has been a fantastic tool alongside Skyline Health Diagnostics and ARIA Operations for Logs. Bringing the capabilities of these tools, which are each all individual installations in themselves, bringing it into a single console, all of that capability. So you're not needing to jump around and doing different deployments of appliances to get that capability. It also brings in the benefit of in-context awareness as well, and in terms of just easy navigation to get to the problem quickly and take those remediation steps required. So once again, simplifying the tooling that you use and reducing the amount of consoles and appliances being deployed. Now, let's talk about the patching and upgrade enhancements that we brought to the VCF platform. Obviously, this is really a significant part of VCF, not to be understated, how this does greatly simplify how you go about doing upgrades and patches across your environment. And I've broken it into 3 areas, which let's jump into these areas now. The first being the ability to do patches on an as-need basis. So with VCF, you get a bill of materials. It comes with a version of NSX, vSAN, vSphere, and HCX. Let's say you deploy that, and then there's a 0-day or there's a bug fix that gets released, and there's a patch to apply for that. Within the UI, we have the ability to apply that patch to your VCF environment for that specific component. And then not only that, but moving forwards, when you create a new workload domain and apply that new bill of materials, it will actually include that patch as well over the top. So just making that process simpler. The other piece of upgrade management is you may be running different workload domains in your environment. So on the bottom right there, you're seeing 4 different workload domains. Each of these workload domains may serve a certain workload, or it could be the case where it's a potentially application or a business unit. But let's take the example of, say, healthcare, where you may be running applications that are provided by the ISV, they're critical applications, and the ISV stipulates that it needs to run on a certain version of VMware. So for workload domain 1, the blue box there, that could be running those workloads that you keep at a certain version of VCF, running an older version of VCF and its components. And then you don't have that limitation to other workload domains where you run different workloads and you can keep them on the latest versions and get the latest capabilities that come with VCF as a result of that. So you have that flexibility across your environment of running different versions and, of course, scheduling upgrades when ready across those different workload domains. Now, this is a really cool feature with ESXi live patching. Now, if you think about how you do patching today with ESXi, with vSphere, you need to put a host into maintenance mode. That obviously evacuates the VMs that run on that node. You then apply the patch, you do a reboot, the node comes up again in maintenance mode, you exit in maintenance mode, DRS kicks in and rebalances the cluster from a compute workload perspective. With ESXi live patching, for patches that are live patch compatible, which you're seeing in the screenshot here on the slide, we can actually put the node into what we call partial maintenance mode, which doesn't evacuate the VMs. The VMs continue to run. We apply the patch, you exit partial maintenance mode, and things continue. Significantly reducing downtime. You don't need to evacuate the VMs and the like. You don't need to do a host reboot. So a really cool feature of the platform and something that we're going to extend out to other components within the VCF stack. So fantastic innovation that's really there to reduce maintenance windows and overall downtime. Finally, on the notion of multi-tenancy, and I've spoken about this from a VPC perspective already. This is now about just all the elements that come into delivering true multi-tenancy across your private cloud. That experience that you get and what you expect when you're using public cloud. When you go to a service provider that might be fronting their own private cloud, bringing that capability to VCF that you can run in your own private cloud environment. Now, you might be familiar with vCloud Director, which has been out for a significant period of time. Many service providers have used that over the years to deliver multi-tenancy in their VMware environment, which you consume. Bringing that capability, as well as capability that exists within ARIA Automation, into VCF natively through its own dedicated dashboard, effectively a multi-tenancy dashboard within VCF that allows you to control, obviously, the levels of granularity in terms of RBAC and so forth, role-based access control across your tenants, as well as the reporting that you need to see the consumption across the various different tenants. VPCs will fold into this and delivering that true service provider level multi-tenancy in your private cloud environment, coming to future versions of VCF. And with that, it might be a good time just to quickly check the questions, Aisha.
Oh, questions are all overflowing. Mark, maybe one questions you want to answer is VCF is great for DCs, but what about smaller sites?
Is that for me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we do have a VCF. So we do have a license model for VCF running in smaller sites, and we can share that information after this webinar. So there is an appropriate license model for running VCF at the edge, as we call it. And in those scenarios, there's different topologies that you can deploy currently to run effectively less servers at those remote locations and being able to ingest them into VCF. So we're aware of there may be scenarios where you don't need all the components that VCF brings to run in smaller sites, and you may only run 2 nodes, for instance, within some of these sites, or less or more in some scenarios. But we do obviously have an architecture, flexibility around that architecture, as well as a license model for running VCF at the edge. But it is a case-by-case basis, so I encourage you to reach out to us for a bit of a workshop to go into more detail with that.
So one question, I think, for Vincent, is cloud maturity model offered as a service? Vincent, if you want to answer it live.
Yeah, sure. So basically, it's a service that we can work alongside with the customers or partner, right? So we have our enterprise architect team to work with them, and then we go through a series of questions and interview, and then we can come up with the cloud maturity model to present it to the customers or partners. Yeah.
Okay, second question I can. Maybe I'll give it to Muru. Muru, isn't there a lot of extra overhead for running VCF versus running vSphere, vSAN, and NSX standalone?
Not really. The idea is, if you look at the 3 different products that you mentioned, that makes up VCF. In fact, as we go ahead with VCF 9, there is a lot of unification that is happening in terms of management, operations, and in fact, there are areas where we have also unified the different appliances that we need, right? The way the roadmap for VCF 9, as we envisage, is to make the operation and day 2 stuff for customers very easy, right? Now that happens when we bring in all the products together. In fact, running them separately has a different life cycle management, but with VCF, we are trying to unify everything into one. So in fact, it makes our life much easy, right? I can give an example where we talk about when you go on a public cloud and you ask, I mean, if you ask for a resource, you don't ask question what is running underneath, what kind of storage does the hyperscaler run, what kind of network they run. That's a kind of experience that we want to bring in on-prem, and that's the reason there is a lot of focus on that from a private cloud perspective.
Next question to you, Chris. Is there any plan or tool for vCloud Director lifecycle management?
I don't actually know the answer to that one, so I'll open it to some of the other panelists, Mark or Will. Is there anything you guys are aware of in that space that we can share?
I can that if it's okay.
Morgan, thank you.
Yeah. On the vCloud, okay, so the entire feature set that we have today with vCloud Director is going to be available with VCF as we go ahead. Having said that, the CSP team within VMware by Broadcom is working closely with all the partners to understand where they are in their journey, right? Having said that, vCloud Director is going to stay for some more time till we have a complete feature parity with VCF, right? So of course there is a whole lot of people who are working with all this cloud service provider.
Okay. Chris, maybe you can help answer this question from a telco space. How can we leverage VCF for TCA with edge computing for 5G VRF/RAN?
Yeah, I can definitely help with that one. There is a telco specific flavor of the VCF stack called Telco Cloud Platform. Many of the same components, but with some specific additional requirements that are needed for telco XNF functions, right? So I would say it's probably beyond the scope of this call, but for telco application specific advice, yes, there is a solution. Reach out to myself or to your account team and we can help you with that.
Okay, I think we just have 10 minutes odd, so I'll let Will continue.
Awesome, thank you. So look, I'm going to close out the session by talking about the way we consume a VCF-based private cloud. Now, this is the last section of our session, but arguably the most important, because at the end of the day, the entire justification for actually having a private cloud is the applications and services we run on top of it. So when we talk to the application teams and developers, platform engineers, people like that who consume a private cloud, they're pretty consistent about what they tell us they want out of a private cloud environment. And really, it's three main things. They're looking for an appropriate interface for them. So, developers might want an API, an SRE might want a Kubernetes-style command line interface, and we might have other users who are much more comfortable interacting with a private cloud through a GUI interface. The other thing we're looking for is a rich set of platform services. So again, it's not enough these days to just offer a VM service. They want containers, they want Kubernetes, they want all the associated services like load balancing and security associated with that. So very much a similar catalog of services as we see on a public cloud style of environment. And the last thing they tell us they want, and this is just about universal, they want us to get out of the way. They want that frictionless self-service. So, when they want a particular service or they want to do a deployment, they don't want to have to wait. They don't want to have to raise a ticket. They don't want to have to wait for approval. They want that to happen right away. And when these things happen, we find most teams are much more productive, much more agile, and much more able to innovate. However, one of the other things we've learned from the public cloud environment is there is such a thing as too much flexibility. So around this flexibility that our application teams desire, we need to have some level of governance and control. When we don't have that, those teams can stray outside of our architecture guidelines and leave us with a significant amount of technical debt, or they can end up wasting a lot of resources that might be better utilized elsewhere. So one of the things we're trying to do with VCF is balance the need for flexibility versus governance. And the reality is that differs from organization to organization. And even within your organization, it's going to differ between teams and environments. So that's a lot of our focus in the VCF consumption side of things, how to put the appropriate amount of governance and compliance into your environment. So let's have a look at how consumption works in the most recent version of VCF. So we start off with our base virtual infrastructure, compute, networking, and storage. And then we have two personas that work on the consumption side of things. There's the concept of a cloud admin. So this is the person that controls and manages access to consumption. So the cloud admin, their first role is to enable what we call the supervisor. And what this is going to do is basically turn on these built-in services that ship with VCF. So the virtual machine service, the Kubernetes service, and all the supporting things around that, such as networking and storage. The other thing the cloud admin does is they manage content. So what do we mean by content? Well, what flavor of virtual machines are available? Is it Windows? Is it Linux? What version of Windows? What version of Linux? What versions of Kubernetes are available? So that's that initial sort of governance of what content is available for use. So once that's done and turned on, then our consumers are able to use those services and deploy their workloads. The cloud admin is then able to go further and add additional services on top of those base services. So those additional services might be ones provided by VMware. So for instance, we have things like container repositories. We have ingress controllers that are available for use. They may also be services available from third parties. So you might want things like a secrets operator, or you might want CI/CD type of services. So it's up to the cloud admin to effectively enable those services and provide access to the consumers or potential consumers of the service. The other thing the cloud admin is responsible for is to start to layer on those layers of governance and compliance. So quotas and policies. So a quota is a way of controlling how much of a particular resource that someone can get. So, if a consumer comes on and asks for a gigantic VM, well, they can get that, but they need to have a quota applied for it. And also managing access to the various servers. So some people might be able to request the Kubernetes environment, others might only be able to request VM. So that type of control that goes over these particular services. The last thing, and I'm not going to talk about too much detail now, I've got a slide later on it, but we talk about consumption pathways. So the way to think of this is, there are probably going to be different consumption pathways for different teams and environments in your organization. So what is appropriate for a team of developers working in a development environment is not necessarily the appropriate consumption pathway for, say, an SRE deploying a real application into production. So we need to have the appropriate mechanisms to cope with those different use cases. So the net of all of this is we end up with this type of architecture where, but based on top of our core compute, storage, and networking, we have these fundamental services that all the other consumption services are built on top of. So we have the vSphere Kubernetes services. We have the ability to deploy containers. We have virtual machine service, and also the data service, or the data services manager, which provides a database as a service type capability. So these service fundamentals can then be used to layer on top of this all those additional services that I talked about earlier. So things like load balancing or container repositories, just whatever is relevant for your organization and also your consumers. The other thing we have in there is also now the ability to go in and create these services using a user interface. So it's actually the first time we've had this capability in VCF. So in the VCF automation component, there are now built-in UIs for deploying virtual machines and Kubernetes environment. Now, this capability existed in the past, but you actually had to go and build that UI yourself. So it's great to see we're now shipping out-of-the-box content to make life easier for those consumers, should they want to use a UI to access those particular services. So as I mentioned, the last thing I want to talk about is concept of consumption pathways. And at one end of the spectrum, as I said, we have developers who are working in a development environment. And for those people, we're probably going to give fairly unfettered access to the environment. They will be able to pretty much do what they like in that environment in terms of what they create, what versions of Kubernetes they use, what types of VMs they create, because at the end of the day, it's just a development environment. However, we move to the other end of the spectrum when we're looking at a more production-oriented environment. We want much more stringent controls around that. And this is where VCF automation comes into play. It allows us to create a catalog of template-driven offerings where we can put really strict controls around versions, around the appropriate security controls, even putting approval processes in place to make sure that anything that goes into our production environment adheres to our standards and is compliant with our security guidelines. So both these extremes are possible, along with all the variants in the middle. And it's going to be really interesting when we get to a VCF 9 timeframe, where we're actually going to have the ability to have a single VCF environment and use multi-tenancy and have these different consumption pathways available in these different tenants. So you could actually have a VCF cluster that is split into development and production tenancies, each with its own consumption pathways. And you're going to have a very high level of confidence that a misconfiguration in the development environment is not going to impact your production environment at all. So it's a very, very powerful feature, and we think it's going to help drive consolidation further in your data centers. So, look, I'm going to finish up there. That's the end of the formal part of the presentation. We've covered a lot of ground today. We started off with that VCF roadmap and vision. Will covered the build and operate section of running a private cloud, and I've just spent some time talking about how we consume a private cloud. And I know when I've spoken about this with customers previously, generally the reaction is, wow, this all looks great, but gosh, how do we go about adopting this in our environment? And again, my call to action is if you're looking at moving to this type of private cloud operating model, one of the best things you can do is email us at cmm@broadcom.com and request a cloud maturity model assessment. This is I want to just make clear, this is a free service. So no downside to doing this. It's a great way to get started on that private cloud journey. Now, if we're not out of time, I might hand back to our moderator and see if we have time for maybe a couple more questions for the panel.
One question which I'll post it tomorrow. Are there any generative AI related services capabilities in VCF 9?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we announced, and in fact, it is generally available now. We have a capability which runs on the platform VCF, and of course, not just VCF 9. Even you can run that today on a VCF platform, which we call VMware Private Cloud Private AI Foundation. Right? It's an engineered solution that we worked together with NVIDIA. You can run this even today on a VCF platform, right? And of course, there is amazing roadmap as we move ahead with VCF 9 as well.
Okay, I think we are on top, right on time. Maybe if we can move on to the next slide. Before you drop off, there are some exciting programs that Broadcom runs. So do join our VMUG community. You can see this QR code here. Sorry, is there a question? Okay. So before we drop off, thank you everyone for the time before you log off. Don't forget to take the survey. Also, 2 programs from Broadcom. One is the VMUG, the VMware User Group. You can scan the code here and know more about the program, join a local group, and have engagement on all things tech. You can also learn about the latest industry trend. It's not just VMware, but from a tech industry overview altogether. Also, we have the Broadcom Rewards program. This reward program is if you can move to the next slide. So this reward program is a unique program in terms of, it's a community of technology enthusiasts. It's a platform where everybody comes, share and a forum where you can share your views, interacts on various engagement, take part on surveys, post your thoughts, and much more. But these all comes with a reward. So every time you engage on the platform, you get reward points. You accumulate your reward points and you get some really exciting gifts, which you can redeem. So leaving with that thought, do take your surveys to earn your digital badge and do scan. You will have get a survey link. Also, you can scan the QR code here. We would love to hear from you. The feedback really does matters to us. Also, I think
you want to display the VMUG QR code again?
yes, maybe I'll just ask them to go 3 slides down. Yep. So people who want to scan the QR code for joining the VMUG committee, that's your code. And once again, thank you everyone for joining. It's been great. I think there's one last question. Okay, we have answered quite a lot of questions. Thank you to our speakers today and our panelists, kind of handling all the questions coming their way. So thank you everyone for joining and have a great rest of the day.